Happy Thursday, fifth grade. This is Miss Gibson with your math lesson for today. So, you guys should have Thursday's lesson out, and it's going to be 5.6. So, make sure you have this out in front of you. Of course, you need to have a blank piece of paper and a pencil and eraser to do the work on the side as you are looking at the problems from the content link and following along with this YouTube video so you can understand how we are doing things moving forward for this lesson. So, hurry up and get those. All right. So today we are going to be using some knowledge that we already know about figuring out the operation that needs to be used in a sentence. So you guys need to make sure that you are reading the problems carefully in order to complete the phrases and write them into expressions and vice versa. So before we get into this part, just a quick review question. Why do we use parentheses in math? Exactly. So we are using parentheses because we show grouping in math with the parentheses or brackets. Okay. So this is telling the reader like what goes together and identifies what is priority. What do I mean by priority? Correct. Priority means for which one should be going first or which one could be solved first or needs to be solved together and not with the other piece of the expression. So, with that being said, you guys are going to try out part A only and then come back. So, we're going to look at part A only and then come back before we can to discuss and then we'll start part B. So, go ahead and pause the video and get started with part A. All right, so let's get into answering part A. All right, so we have the difference of the product of 7 and 8 and the sum of 5 and a number y. What operation are involved and how do you know? So let's look at the words that are here. So we have difference, we have product, and we have sum. What operations are involved within this? Right, so for one, we have difference. What does difference mean? Subtraction, exactly. And then what else do we have? We have product. What does product mean? Multiplication. And then lastly, we have sum, which is what does that mean? Addition. All right, so this is telling us right now that in our expression, when we write our expression from the phrase, that we need to include these three symbols, but we have to include them in a specific way. So the next thing is asking us how many groups are there? So let's figure out how many groups are there. So let's reread again. The difference of the product of 7 and 8 and the sum of 5 and a number y. Let's circle the groups here. All right, so realize we have two groups here. Two groupings means that we need to put both of those in the parentheses in our answers, in our expression from the phrase. So it says the difference of the product of 7 and 8 and the sum of 5 and a number y. So product of 7 and 8. So we know that we should be multiplying 7 and 8, and product of has the two um, numbers right within that phrase and that mini phrase. And then after and, it has another few numbers in that mini phrase as well. So when we write our expression, we need to learn how to group things together in order to write this expression out. So our expression right now should be this. All right, so realize I put my numbers as 7 times 8 in parentheses minus 5 plus y. Why does order matter when we are doing this type of phrase and putting into an expression? Correct. Order matters because we are using subtraction because that's where the difference word comes in. And we need to make sure that when we are subtracting, that first phrase comes first because it's telling us the difference of the product of 7 and 8 and the sum of 5 and the number y. So realize that we need to make sure that we are using this phrase first because it's asking us the difference of this product and this sum, okay? And then, of course, when we are setting this up, realize I made sure to multiply my first phrase in this expression because it's asking us for the product. And I made sure to do adding for the second phrase because it's asking for the sum. All right. So now that we got into writing the phrase for the first one, you guys are going to be getting into part B. So you're going to write an expression to match the following phrases, circling the groupings in the phrases. So just as we did part A, how we went through all the steps, we made sure to identify what operations were being used. I circled the groups, and then I made sure that order mattered based off of the original piece of the phrase that I need to complete. So go ahead and try this out. Make sure you're writing the complete expressions with the information given. So go ahead and pause the video and get started. All right, so welcome back from trying out how to write the expression to match the following phrases and circling the groups in the phrases. So of course, my first step was to circle the groups so I know what should be going in my parentheses to begin with. So it asked me for number one, the quotient of 8 and 4 subtracted from the quotient of 2 and x. So realize it's asking me right here quotient of 8 and 4, so I know I should be circling this group because it's telling me the operation out of the two numbers. Then again, quotient of 2 and x, telling me the operation followed by of the two numbers. Now, what does quotient mean? Correct. It means to divide. So I'm going to make sure that I am dividing in my parentheses. So I put like a fraction sign right here, which is the same thing as division, of course. Now, why did I do subtraction and why did I choose this order? Why did I not put 8 divided by 4 first? Exactly, because right here in the phrase, it says subtracted from the quotient of 2 and x, meaning that 2 and x should, the quotient of 2 and x should be in the first parentheses because I am subtracting 8, the quotient of 8 and 4 from this parentheses work right here. So make sure you are reading the questions and the phrases carefully because it's telling you how you should be setting this up. And order always matters when we're doing subtraction and division. So you have to make sure you are paying attention to this. Number two, it says the sum of 9 and f increased by a factor of the difference between 12 and 10. What, why did I set it up this way? And does order matter when I'm using multiplication? No, order does not matter when I'm using multiplication. So you just have to make sure that what the word that we put in parentheses matches the word that are in the phrases. So sum, we already know that that means addition. So I am adding 9 and f together in parentheses. And then I'm multiplying this because it's increased by a factor. Factor is another word to tell us that we should be multiplying two numbers together because that's the other factor or factors equal multiplication. And then the difference between 12 and 10 is telling me the difference, meaning to subtract. So 12 minus 10 should be in the second parentheses. All right, we are going to get into some guided practice together, and then we're going to take some notes. So let's try out the guided practice together, and then after that, we'll get into notes, and then you guys will be off to try out the practice packet for today before you get into the exit ticket. So guided practice, write an expression for each one. So, number one, the difference of 18 and 4 added to the product of R and F. So, what operations am I using and how do we know? Right, we are using subtraction because it's talking about the difference. We're using adding because it's talking about added to. And we're using multiplication because it says product. Now, what are my two groups? What are my two groups? Exactly. My two groups are the difference of 18 and 4, and then the product of R and F. So we're going to highlight those. So we should know that these are what's going in our parentheses. All right. Now let's write this out. So if I have the difference of 18 and 4, I know my first parentheses should be 18 minus 4. And then you're adding. and then to the product of R and F. So R times F. Okay. Now, try out the next two and then come back and check your work to see how you're doing. So remember, you should be identifying those operations that we need to use, circling or highlighting, and circling or highlighting the groups that are in the sentence, and then writing it out based off the information that's given to you to write that expression. So go ahead and pause the video and try two and three. All right, so welcome back from trying out numbers two and three. I want you to check your work. Did you go through the steps of identifying what operations you will be using? Did you highlight or circle the two groups that are within the phrase? And when you were setting it up, did you make sure that you were putting the order correctly if you were subtracting or dividing? So go ahead and check your work. If you have any questions after this guided practice, please write them down and then see if these questions are still there after you try out that practice packet for today. Now, you guys are going to get started on the practice packet for today. So, realize you need to be going through the same steps we just did for all questions. All right. So, let's pause, let's get into notes, and then after that, you guys can get into the practice packet. All right, so the notes that you guys should be writing down for today are, of course, you can use parentheses to indicate a group in a multi-operation expression. So that means that's the work that we were doing on the final product by making sure that we were putting our groups in the parentheses in from reading a phrase that had a multiple step problem. Two, when writing an expression, go through the following steps by using the phrase. So one, of course, always identify the operations being used. Two, circle the groups within the phrase. And three, write the expression in correct order based off of the phrase. So this number three always comes, you always have to write that expression out based off the phrase when you're following the instructions. And then order matters for which group comes first based on if you are subtracting or dividing. So make sure you are paying attention to what the question is asking of you or what the information the phrase is giving. All right. So go ahead and pause the video and write these notes down. All right, welcome back from writing the notes. You guys can now get started on the practice packet for today. Make sure you're reading carefully the instructions for the pieces in the practice packet. And then after that, come back here to go over your answers, and then you guys can get into the exit ticket. All right. All right, so welcome back from trying out the practice packet. Let's go through, check your work, and go through why these answers are correct. And of course, any misconceptions, hopefully you guys can bounce back from that and see why your answer is incorrect based off of the information that's given for me. So number one, it says divide the difference of 19 and y by the sum of 3 and g. So of course, I am highlighting already automatically the two groups that are in the sentence, in the phrase. I know that when I put these into an expression, I need to divide the two pieces and groups by each other. So the first piece is saying to divide the difference of 19 and y by the sum of 3 and g. So I know my first group is going to be 19 minus y. Why am I doing subtraction? Right, because it's saying difference. So I know that it should be 19 minus y, and then I'm dividing this first group by the second group, which is the sum of 3 and g. So it's the sum of 3 and g. And I know that I should be adding because adding and sum are the same thing. So this is my expression for number one. It should be 19 minus y in my first group divided by 3 plus g. Number two, it says 9 less than the difference of y and 1 2/5. All right, so I put in my answer 9 minus y minus 1 and 2/5. Do you agree with number two? No, we should not be agreeing with this because it is saying 9 less than the difference of. So this is going to be incorrect, okay? Reason being is because if it's asking me to do 9 less than the difference of, I need to put this group first and then subtract 9. So with that being said, we are going to cross this out and retype this in. So it should be y minus 1 and 2 fifths in parentheses minus 9. All right, let's go on to the next one, number 3. It says the product of 2 and 1/4 in A split into groups of 4. What does split into groups of 4? What operation is that? Correct. This is division. So always make sure you are reading these sentences carefully and realize that we should be dividing after we put the group in our parentheses. So we only have one group in number 3, just as we had one group in number 2. And then I made sure to still highlight so I know what my group is. And I have 2 and 1/4 times A because multiplication is the same for product divided by 4 because it's telling me to split my group here into 4 groups. All right. Number 4, the quotient of the sum of half and y and the sum of 5 and t. So if they're asking for quotient, what should I be doing after I put my two groups together? Correct, dividing. So I put my first group of a half plus y divided by 5 plus t. All right, let's go through 5 and 6 together before you guys get into the exit ticket for today. So these are going through and saying, are these expressions the same? Explain. I went through the initial step of course, identifying my groups within each phrase. So if you didn't do that, go ahead and pause the video, make sure you're circling those groups, and then come back to this video. All right. So I know my first groups in the first phrase, it says the sum of the product of 9 and y and the difference of 8 and x. Then in my second group, it says the difference of 8 and x added to the product of 9 and y. What do they have in common right here? Correct. The way that we should the relationship between the two groups, both are adding. So if I were to write these out, so let's go through and write number 1 out. I know that number 1, well, phrase 1, the sum of the product of 9 and y is the sum of the product. Product is the same as what operation? Correct, multiplication. So 9 and y, I'm adding. And then what's this operation for difference? Correct, subtraction. So 8 minus x. So that's for phrase 1. Now, let's write down phrase 2 and see if that's going to be the same or different. So the difference of x of 8 and x, so this is the same thing, 8 minus x, and then add it to, so of course I'm doing addition here, product of 9 and y. Now, based off of these two phrases written into expressions, are these the same thing? Why or why not? Correct. These expressions are the same. Does order matter when we do addition? No. So these can both be interchangeable because we are doing addition with the two groups, and the two groups are exactly the same. So realize why these are the same. They have the same groups, just being put in a different order, and order doesn't matter because we are just doing addition here. All right, let's go to number 6. Are these expressions the same? Explain. So again, we're going to go through that same process we just did for number 5. And then after that, you guys are going to get into that exit ticket. Secret code time. Your secret code for the exit ticket for math today is jacket. Jacket. Make sure you're spelling that correctly when you're inputting that in. Now let's go over number 6 before you guys get into that exit ticket for today. So I went through the same process of course, highlighting my groups within my phrase. So I highlighted 9 plus 5 and product of y and 4. And then I also highlighted product of y and 4 and sum of 9 and 5. Now, they are both asking us to do what operation in between both groups? Correct, division. Now, let's set these up and see if these expressions are the same based off of the phrase that's given. So the quotient of 9 plus 5 and the product of y and 4. So 9 plus 5, of course, always putting in parentheses. Quotient, I'm going to put a bar. And then the product of y and 4. So product is equal to the same operation as what? Multiplication. Okay, so this is our first one. Now let's see if our second one is going to be the same exact way here. So this one says the product of y and 4 divided by the sum of 9 and 5. So the same thing here, product of y and 4 divided by the sum of 9 and 5. Now, we realized here that the information in our two groups are the same, but the way that they're set up are different. So, are these expressions the same if we were to if we were able to solve these? Yes or no? No. So these expressions are not the same. Why are they not the same? Correct, because order matters when we are doing division. So realize order is always going to matter for which two operations? Division and subtraction, because the numbers are getting smaller. And then, of course, or bigger based off of which ones you're dividing by. And then, of course, you guys are going to realize that expressions are the same and order does not matter when we are doing addition or multiplication. Those are both interchangeable. Things and phrases and groups are not interchangeable when we are doing division and subtraction. It will lead to two different answers. Just think as just think of it as 10 divided by 5 equals 2. But if 5 divided by 10 does not equal 2, that equals a half. So realize the difference and why we have to make sure you were reading the phrases carefully and writing those expressions out. All right. So you guys can go ahead and get into the exit ticket for today. Make sure you are doing all of the workout on a piece of paper. I would suggest writing out the work and then circling and doing the steps that we usually do with identifying the groups, figuring out which operations we're using, and then trying to write those expressions out. All right. Bye. Have a great Thursday.